I'll take the liberty now, since I'm in the chair as a ersatz for John Henry. I wanted to raise with John Mearsheimer. You made some comparisons to Russia's reaction to Ukraine and the U.S. and Cuba, Fidel Castro, and how we viewed Cuba and Castro as a threat to our security interest and existential threat. And the response, we had the Bay of Pigs, the attempted assassinations of Castro that have out Operation Mongoose. We even had plans after the failed Bay of Pigs to invade. Do you think those responses of the United States were morally or legally legitimate responses that we made? That were an example that other countries should and can follow, or are they something that ought not to be followed?
This is a great question, and of course it follows on one of your three initial points, as well as Adam Dixon's comments, which have to do with the subject of rights and what's morally or legally permissible in the international system. I think that in international politics, states usually pay attention to international law and they pay attention to moral precepts as long as they're in their strategic interests. But if there's a conflict between international law and a country's strategic interests, the country will always privilege its strategic interests, and international law and human rights will be pushed off the table. This is why I think it's not very helpful to talk about rights. When you talk about whether Russia has the right to have a buffer state, or Ukraine has the right to have its own foreign policy, these are concepts that, in my opinion, get you into all sorts of trouble. In the international system, might makes right. And the United States would never tolerate a situation where Canada or Mexico invited, in a legal way, China to bring military forces into Toronto or Mexico City. We have a Monroe Doctrine, which is in our strategic interest. And our Monroe Doctrine says no distant great power is allowed to put military forces in the Western Hemisphere, period. End of story. What the Russians are doing here is they're basically articulating their own version of the Monroe Doctrine. They're saying you cannot turn Ukraine into a Western bastion on our border. It has nothing to do with rights, right? It doesn't matter whether Ukraine has the right to do this or that. We're saying they can't do it. Just like we're saying Cuba can't invite the Soviets to bring military forces into the Western Hemisphere. So for me, when you talk about great power politics, rights in the final analysis just don't matter. Might makes right. And the United States is a mighty powerful country. It's a mighty powerful country on purpose, and it does whatever it thinks is in its strategic interest. And if the rights say that's okay to do, good. But if the rights are at odds with what's in our strategic interests, we do what's in our strategic interests.